Hi, I'm Tom Coolidge, Esri's Pipeline Industry Manager. Along with my colleagues Jeff Allen, Vanessa Ramirez, and Anjali Bangay, welcome to the second webinar in Esri's 2017 Pipeline Webinar Series. You may have heard that earlier this year Esri introduced its new brand, The Science of Where. The Science of Where reflects Esri's commitment to geoscience and to innovating the great technologies that harness it, so that you can continue to create the maps that run the global pipeline industry. Today's seminar focuses on one of those innovations, ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the next few days. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. We hope you'll revisit it to learn more. Before we get started, I would like to encourage you to post your questions in the GoToWebinar Questions dialog box during the presentation. We will answer as many questions as time permits after the webinar. Now, please welcome my colleague, Jeff Allen.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning. I have a couple of slides here we're going to go through before we get into the actual demonstration of APR. But just to kind of set the stage of why we've developed APR and where we're heading with our technology in the pipeline industry, really Esri has taken a new focus looking at the entire life cycle within a pipeline organization. So traditionally we've really focused on the asset management group and the pipeline integrity group, probably the two largest consumers of GIS data within the organization. But we see that really expanding out to the rest of the groups. So we now see more adoption in things like asset operations with our mobile computing, inspections, workforce applications, folks in HS&E looking at workflows that utilize GIS, business management, as well as the upstream, looking at new pipelines being developed, the planning, the right-of-way, and the engineering. So all of these groups within the pipeline organization really pull from a common set of data, the common set or the single set of truth about those pipeline assets. And so we commonly refer to that as our system of record. So the system of record is not only the GIS, but all those other interconnected systems within the pipeline organization that hold key elements or key data about the pipeline assets and their operations. So the GIS tends to be at the center, managing location about those assets. But these other systems of record are also integral into making decisions about the pipeline operations. So within that GIS core is where we really focused our development efforts related to APR. So what is ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing? APR simply is a core linear management system built into the core of the Esri technology. So it's not a pipeline data model per se, but a core location model to do linear referencing within the enterprise geodatabase. It allows us to create center lines, manage routes, and then manage the point and linear events that sit on top of those routes. APR really focuses on your GIS professionals, the folks within the organization that are editing and maintaining the pipeline databases within the GIS. So to that end, there's a number of tools that are built into our new ArcGIS Pipeline Pro product to be able to manage routes, and then a web editing tool to be able to manage the events along those routes. But one of the key features of APR is that it actually creates feature classes within the enterprise geodatabase that can be easily shared with the rest of the organization through technology like Portal. So once data has been created using the APR tools, it can then be consumed inside a web map, and then a web map can be published to the organization. It can be used through web applications as well as our mobile computing platform. So let's take a deeper dive and see what is actually embedded inside of the ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing toolbox. So as I mentioned, it's a core data management tool for editing linear data. So obviously data management is a huge component of it. So the editing of the routes and editing of the events along those routes. But we've also included within that some quality control and workflow functionality as well. I also mentioned the information model. So the information model is a core set of tables that are embedded into the geodatabase to help you manage those routes and events along those routes. We also include an extension for server that allows web services, a REST endpoints exposure on the server. And this is what our event editing tool takes advantage of. It could also be used to enable other web applications to consume linear reference functionality as well. And then finally, a number of geoprocessing tools that can be used for bulk data loading, data transformation. Basically anything you can do with a single click in the desktop editing environment, you can do in batch through our geoprocessing tools, which then can be consumed inside of, say, a Python application or a model builder application. So here's that location model I was referencing. So these are the core set of feature classes and tables that are required for APR to be able to function in the geodatabase. It starts with a center line, the center line being that geographic location of where that pipeline exists on the face of the earth. From there, center lines are consumed into routes, and routes are also part of a network. A network basically is a common set of measuring system for a pipeline. So engineering stationing would be a network, continuous stationing might be a separate network, mile posting might be its own network, or odometer readings could be its own network. Inside of those networks we have routes. Routes are that common set of pipeline attributes or way we organize a pipeline in the pipeline database within those networks. And then we calibrate those routes using a point feature class called calibration point feature class. So the routes end up becoming a measured polyline in the geodatabase, and that measured polyline is actually created by a combination of that centerline object and those calibration points along that center line. And we show you this in more detail when we get to the demo portion of the webinar. As I mentioned, the main editing, the route editing tools have been built so that they work inside of our ArcGIS Pro environment. So when you're in the Pro environment and you add data to the map, you'll get a new location referencing ribbon. And this ribbon is where we do most of our route editing or all our route editing operations against the networks. And again, we'll show you this in more detail when we get to the demo itself. And then finally, we have a web application that is used to edit the events along the pipeline center line. So we split out the editing environments. So we do some desktop editing. On the desktop, we do the route editing and the route calibration. But when we're actually placing events and linear point events along those pipelines, we do that through a web application. So this is an HTML5 JavaScript application that's taking advantage of that server extension. It can be used standalone or it can be registered with the portal itself. And so in this application, the advantage here is that you can actually publish multiple versions of this application to different constituents within the organization that might be editing different types of data. So I might be publishing all my facilities to my GIS group so they can enter all the pipe, the case, and the encoding. But I might have a separate web map that's used for my integrity department who's placing things like MAOP, class, and HCA range events along those pipelines. So the advantage of this is you can kind of split up the editing workflow and also push some of those edits to folks that aren't necessarily desktop users or GIS professionals. So let's take a kind of a step back and see how the whole ecosystem of the ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing works. As I mentioned, we have those core components, the route editor, the event editor, the server extension, the geoprocessing tools. But we also ship with the product 3 additional extensions. One is the ArcGIS Data Reviewer. This is important because we took all the data QA/QC checks that the tool would perform and actually put them into the Data Reviewer tool. So the linear referencing checks are now embedded into Data Reviewer with all the other data checks that Data Reviewer provided. The key to this is that you can actually point Data Reviewer not only to the enterprise geodatabase, but also to other incoming data sets you might receive, say, from a survey contractor. So you can do your data QA/QC checks on, say, a file geodatabase as received from the survey contractor, check it there, and then load it into the enterprise geodatabase. We also ship ArcGIS Workflow Manager. This is really used for those longer workflows in a pipeline editing cycle. So we might be doing a reroute that would constitute doing the reroute of the line, adding facility details to that line, doing an MAOP calculation on the new rerouted section, maybe potentially a class or an HCA calculation. That long workflow that might cover a week or a month to to take place inside the database can be all tracked and managed with the workflow manager. And then finally, we've also included Esri production mapping. This is be utilized for, say, those wall maps and system maps you want to produce from this data to distribute to the organization. Now, along with the software components, there's also other key components that you would want to take advantage of when using ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing. The largest one being our partner solutions and services. So although we're doing some of the editing in the core Esri environment, we still have a number of different partner applications that are supportive of this workflow. Things like alignment sheet generation, risk calculations, MAOP class, DOT reporting. All those things are partner solutions that plug into the stack and utilize ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing to retrieve its data for those analytical calculations. Now, ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing can be used with a number of the industry standard data models. So we've been working with pods to have a new version, the next generation of pods, which will have the APR tables embedded into them, as well as the utility and pipeline data model that you can download from Esri. This also has the APR, ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing, core tables embedded into it as well. You'll hear us start talking more and more about ArcGIS Utility Network. This is the next generation of our geometric network or utility network tools. Also, these will be available in Pro, and as we move forward, a number of our pipeline operators that manage both distribution and transmission, or transmission and gathering, or all three, could utilize a mixture of linear referencing and utility or networking within the same core data model. And then finally, we have the rich online content and services that you can consume with our platform. So not only can you edit the pipelines with ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing, but you can pull in a whole host of data from our online store or Living Atlas to help with that data workflow. And so from this ecosystem, then we have a number of different folks that would plug into this. Obviously, the GIS professionals that are doing the heavy editing, but also developers can take advantage of the REST endpoints and the server extension to write additional applications using this functionality. We have the knowledge workers that are pulling information from this core system, the field crews that could take advantage of linear referencing in the mobile environment, as well as decision makers within the organization who are using GIS to make those daily decisions about the operations. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Vanessa, who is going to show us a demo of APR both on the desktop and the web editor. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vanessa.
Thank you, Jeff. So I'm just going to pop over here, and hopefully everybody can see my screen. And so I really want to start with talking about that core information model that Jeff was describing, because I think this is a really important concept. So what I've done is I've actually taken a blank file geodatabase, and I have actually enabled the linear referencing capabilities on it. So we can actually see the ALRS being enabled. And that LRS actually manages both our continuous and our station series network, right? So we have multiple networks that can actually participate within the LRS. And you'll notice within this database, the core tables that Jeff was describing. We have our calibration points, we have our center line, and then we actually have our network, which houses our routes. And then if we drill a little bit further, our networks can actually contain events. So if I have events associated to them, I should say. So when I click on the station series network, for example, you'll see that I have pipe and valve events that are associated with that network. And again, these are all highlighted or shown as simple features within the geodatabase, right? So it's not really a special object within the catalog. It's just a feature class. Now, the reason I did this in a blank geodatabase was to kind of show you just the information, isolate the information model. But presumably, you're going to be using this with a larger data model. So for example, if I click on my enterprise connection here, in this case, I'm using UPDM. So the Esri UPDM data model is providing a lot of the structure within the database, but I still have that core ALRS functionality and those core tables. Now, in this particular case, I have 3 networks, but today we're going to focus on the station series network, which in my example has quite a few different types of events associated with it. So each of these events is within the data model as an actual feature class. Now, the reason I'm showing you this in our catalog is that at the first release of APR, setting up the LRS and some of the initial data loading actually happens within ArcMap and ArcCatalog. However, all of the data editing and all of your editors will actually utilize the tool within ArcGIS Pro. So for those of you that are not familiar with ArcGIS Pro, this is our next generation desktop software. And like Jeff mentioned, it has this ribbon-based contextual interface. So what do I really mean by that? So if we look at that same APR information model database, that simple database we got at first, and we grab the center line, remember this is a feature class managed by APR. When I drag this into my map, and the appearance tab will appear, so I'm actually going to change this really quickly to reflect a slightly different symbol. I'm not going to worry too much about what it is, just want to make sure you guys can see it. And then one thing I want you to notice is that the location referencing toolbar has appeared. So Pro is intelligent enough to recognize that APR managed data has been added to the map, and it actually triggers this particular toolbar. So I just wanted to show you guys how that functionality is enabled. But for the purposes of our demo here today, I'm actually going to use our data coming from UPDM because it's a little bit more complete. So in this case, I have my station series network, and I have it symbolized based on the commodity type, like you can see in the table of contents, right? So what I want to walk through today is what it would look like to add a new route to this particular network. So for example, let's say we have a new gathering field and we need to connect to it, right? We need to add a lateral that will connect us to that gathering field. Presumably we'd have some sort of shapefile or feature class that contains that geometry. It might come from the field, it might have been digitized, whatever the case may be. So I have this survey data geodatabase. I can actually drag and drop that lateral onto the map and I'll actually see the location. So let's zoom a little bit closer and maybe make the appearance a bit easier to see. So I'm going to come in here and change my appearance again. We'll make our symbol a ramp again just for simplicity. Okay. So now what I'm really looking at is I've just got the geometry for this new line. And then you notice as I zoomed in, some additional layers came on. So I have valve events and pipe events, which I'm actually going to turn off for the time being. Then I also have station series, my calibration points, and my network. But if you remember, Jeff mentioned that all of the networks are driven by a single underlying centerline. So there's really one single centerline feature class that's actually driving everything, all of the networks, and keeping them in sync. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I need to do is actually incorporate this particular segment into my centerline feature class. So I can do that using the traditional editing tools. I'll come to edit and select the segments. In this case, I actually have two small segments. And then I can do a simple copy and paste into that centerline layer. So it'll ask for the target layer. We'll say it's the centerline. And it'll paste those features, taking them out or copying them to the underlying centerline. So now we can remove the data set from the field, and you'll see it's now a part, it now corresponds to that underlying centerline. Now keep in mind this centerline is just geometry. It does not have any measure values and actually has no attributes with it either. It's just simple geometry. So the next thing I want to do is actually incorporate this into my station series network. So I actually want to put some measure values on this particular line, turn it into a route. So for that, I'll go to the location referencing toolbar, and I'm going to trigger the create a route tool. The first thing it's going to ask me is what network is this going to participate in? So in this example, we're just going to stick with the station series network. And then I'll be asked to provide a route name. So a route name is required by APR, and routes can roll up into lines. So I'm just going to call this Webinar March 2017, And then our line can be webinar series. And then everything in APR is time enabled, like you'll see later in the demo. So everything has a date associated with it. So in this case, I'm actually going to set this to March 15th. And then the next thing I need to do is provide the from and to measure for the route that's supposed to be created. So I can actually use the Choose Centerline tool to select the segments on the map. So using the Shift key, I can select multiple segments and actually see the direction in which the route will flow. Now, this is based on the direction in which the lines were digitized. So if you wanted to reverse this direction, you would actually have to reverse the digitizing on the line. Now, from what I selected on the map, it's created a from and to measure. But let's say I knew the true measure, so let's say I knew there were really 78,000 feet of pipe in the ground. I could actually type in that measure and have the line calibrate according to the beginning and end. Now in this case, I've chosen to include a few attributes. It's up to you whether you include attributes and which attributes you include. This is set up in the configuration. So in this case, I'm going to say this is a transmission line, it's moving crude oil, and it's an onshore line. So I can go ahead and run that tool, and that will actually create two things. It will create a route within my station series network, and then it will create two calibration points, one at the beginning of the route and one at the end of the route. So it's really just calibrated the line based off of that beginning and end calibration point. Now, in reality, you probably want to have additional calibration points. So for example, we may want a calibration point at every bend. So if that's the case, perhaps we have more survey data from the field. So we have calibration points that have been collected via GPS. I can actually drag and drop them on the map and see that they correspond to the various bends. So in order to recalibrate our line, what we really need to do is incorporate these calibration points from the field with that core calibration points table, with that station series calibration points. Now, before we can do that, we need to tell APR which route these calibration points are associated with. So I'm actually going to click on this particular route and grab this route ID and copy it so I can match that to my calibration points. So I'll open up the calibration points coming from the field, and you'll notice they have a route ID. So I will actually calculate this field to update the value to reflect the correct route within my GIS. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that value in here and actually run the tool. And when I do that, those values will update. So now I'm ready to actually bring those calibration points into that greater feature class. So for that, I can use the out-of-the-box append tool. So the append tool will simply take features from one data set and input them into another. So my input is going to be the Holdale calibration points, and my target data set is going to be the station series calibration points. So when I run that tool, you'll actually see those measure values appear on the map. And if I remove the field-based calibration points, you can now see I have all these new calibration points within that core table. Now, what I've done so far is just add the calibration points. I have not actually recalibrated the line. So in order to do that, I'll run what we call the Generate Routes tool, which is specific to APR. So I'll actually open up that tool, and it'll ask me to input which route I would like to calibrate. Now, if I don't make a selection on the map, it will run it on the entire network. So what I want to do is actually select the particular route that I'm trying to recalibrate and then ask it to recalibrate the station series network. So when I do that, I can actually run the tool and it'll recalibrate based on the calibration points that I've added. So I can then go to location referencing and use my Identify Routes tool to click anywhere along the map and actually see that measure value, right? So we now have a polyline M within the database that's been calibrated based on those calibration points that were brought in from the field. So just to recap, we've taken a feature class, incorporated it to the underlying center line, and then created a route off of that and calibrated it using a set of calibration points. So really that wraps up the route editing piece that I want to show you within ArcGIS Pro. So I'm going to go ahead and actually save my edits. So this will save my new route. Now, if you remember, I had a linear event that was the pipe event, as well as a point event that were the valves represented on my map. So I actually want to go create events on this route, or perhaps somebody else in my organization is going to create events on this route. So that's actually done through the event editor. So the event editor is a web application that's dedicated, its purpose is to create events along the routes. So if we zoom to that area of interest, we should see that line or that route that we just created within ArcGIS Pro. So remember, this is all connecting to my central UPDM database, so everything stays in sync. If I open up my table of contents, you'll see that in this case, I'm editing all my events through a single event editor. However, this could be broken out the way Jeff described by different groups. So if you'll notice, I have just the network and I need to add the pipe and the valves as well. So I'm going to walk you through how to add both point and line events. So I'll come up to the Edit tab, and I want to create a new point event. This will take me to a wizard to walk me through how to do that. The first thing I have to select is what type of event would I like to create. So we're going to create a valve on the station series network, and then it's going to ask me the name of the route. I could either type this in. I don't quite remember what I put in for the name, so we're actually just going to select it using the map, and it'll populate that information. And then it'll ask me what my method for locating it is. So we can use offsets, but in this case, we're just going to stick with a station series network. And then it asks me to provide a measure. If I had a measure, I could actually place it in, or I could click on the map and have it derive the measure from the geometry. So I'm just going to drop the valve in the middle of the line there. And then the last thing is, if you remember, everything is time enabled. So it's going to ask me for a start date on that particular valve. I want to use the same date as the route because I want everything to stay consistent with respect to construction. So I'll hit next, and it'll ask me to fill out all of the attributes for that particular valve. So this is actually coming from my data model. And in this case, I'm not going to go through and fill everything out, but I will give it a facility ID so that we can find it later in the demo. So we'll call it Holdale 200. And then actually save that particular point event. So that gets saved back to my database. Now, creating a linear event is quite similar. There's just one key distinction of functionality in APR that I want to highlight. Again, we'll work off of our station series network, and the line name can be selected from the map. But the main difference here is you'll notice I have a from route and a to route. So in APR, events can actually span routes. So for example, I might have a pipe event or an MAOP event that would span multiple routes. I could actually account for that. In this case, I'm just going to stick to a single route. So again, I'll select using the map. And then I'll say I want the start measure to be the route start. And then the to route is going to be the same route, but in this case, we're going to use the route end. So essentially we're saying apply this pipe event to the entire length of this route. I'll push my start date to the 15th, and then I'll hit next, and I'll be met with a series of attributes. So I'm going to say I have an outside diameter of 20. My pipe grade is, and actually let's go back to our wall thickness, do 0.203, and my manufacturer is US Steel. So I'll save those events, or that event, I should say. And we now see that event on the map. Now, there may be situations in which you want to edit more than one event at one time. So what you can do is actually select the layer you want to work with. So in this case, let's stick with our valves. And then select via a rectangle. So I can drag and drop a box and have a tabular form appear where I can actually do inline editing and make changes to the data in bulk. There's also a calculator that allows me to change a whole attribute for an area at a time, right? So bulk calculations similar to what you may be used to in desktop. So really, the event editor is your primary place for doing all of the event editing that corresponds to the routes being edited in Pro. That being said, let's actually return to Pro and refresh our database connection so we can see what's been created inside the event editor. So I'll come to my connection and then actually refresh. And when I do that, I see both my pipe with the attributes that I've entered and the valve with that valve ID incorporated into my data. Now, this will become more important as we continue through the demo. But notice at the top, I actually have a time slider. So right now, I'm viewing the time period from March 2nd to March 26th. If you recall, all of this was created on March 15th. So if I was to move back in time, all of this information would disappear. I don't have time enabled on my calibration points, which is why you see that. But so we return roughly to that time frame, you'll see that information. So everything is temporal and can be visualized using the time slider. Okay? Now I'm going to actually turn off my events here for a second and just in my calibration points and actually just focus on our route. So now let's say that for some reason there's either a wetland here or we've had a landowner, we've had to renegotiate. For some reason we actually have to reroute this particular portion of the line. I want to walk you through how you would do that in APR. So again, I have a reroute feature class coming in from the field. I can actually drop that on the map. Again, we'll tweak the appearance to make it a little bit easier to see. And just like last time, the first thing we need to do is incorporate it into the underlying centerline feature class. So I can go up to my Edit tab. I can select that particular segment and again do a copy and then paste into that centerline layer. We'll clear our selection, remove the field data, and you now see it's incorporated to the underlying centerline. Now, this time, we're not actually going to create a new route. We actually want to do what we call a realign. So we want to move the location of the route. So for that, we have a realign tool. So I'll launch that, and just like you see throughout the system, it'll ask me which network are you working with and what's your effective date. So we're going to make that reroute effective today, and then it'll ask me to select the route. I can actually use that Choose Centerline tool again to select my new route and have it automatically populate this for me. So what's the route that's being realigned and what's the from and to measure for that realignment. Now there's a couple checkboxes here that are key. The first is this reassign to abandoned routes. We do not want these measures to be reassigned to the abandoned route, so we're actually going to uncheck that box. The other is recalibrate the route downstream. If we leave this checked, APR will automatically recalibrate all of these measures. But we actually don't want to do that. We want to retain the measure values for this portion of the route. So we'll go ahead and run that tool, and I'll get a quick warning telling me that a new route will be created in the realigned portion, which is what we would expect, right? We want to see a route that constitutes this. So that's fine. And then I'll be asked to give that route a name. So we'll call it webinar new route and give it the attributes like we have throughout the demo. So crude oil and onshore. Actually go ahead and run that tool. Now, the results initially may appear like nothing is happening, but keep in mind our time is stopped at the 25th. So what I'm going to do is close down our time window and actually move us to the 31st, where you'll actually see that that route has changed. So if we click off the underlying center line and I identify, you'll see two routes, one that represents the new realigned portion and then the initial downstream portion of the route. So going back in time, if we go to the 22nd, for example, we actually see the original route, right? So everything's temporal and we can kind of have that history for our routes. Now, that history is also relevant for our events. So for example, if I turn my pipe and valve layers back on, you'll notice, okay, this is where they were on the 22nd, but we're going to notice something a little bit odd. As I move to the 31st, I see my reroute, but those events actually have not been updated. So we need to run one more tool to actually apply the event behaviors to the realign that we performed. So if we return to the geoprocessing, we can find a tool called Apply Event Behaviors. And again, what we want to do is select all the routes that we want to run this for. So I'm going to expand this time frame so we can grab all the routes. I'm going to select the routes within that particular area and then tell it to apply the event behaviors to all the routes selected in the station series network. So it's going to take a second for it to figure out which routes it's working with and what the event behaviors it needs to update are. And once it gets all the parameters, I'll be able to run the tool and show you temporally what happens with the events. Okay, so let's clear our selection. So now our time window is, let's reduce our time window again. So if we go back to the 15th, we had that one pipe event that spanned the entire route. But then as we move forward to when we rerouted on the 30th, so if we move to the 31st, you'll now see that that valve has actually disappeared because it's been retired, and that pipe event has been split. So the pipe event is retained for the original portions of the route, but the rerouted piece does not have a pipe event on it. So we've actually split that event using the event behaviors. So really just to recap, because I know we've covered a lot, so we've incorporated data from the field into our underlying center line, made that a part of our network, calibrated that route, and then created events on it. Then we actually rerouted that particular route and applied the event behaviors to see how our events behave in the wake of changes to that particular route. Now, keep in mind that everything we've shown you today has been simple features. Everything is just feature classes. So I could very easily come up to the Share tab and say, I'd like to share this as a web map. So I could share this linear reference enterprise data up to my portal for others to consume. And I won't walk you through the publication process today, but what I will show you is what that end result looks like. So I could come to my portal and click on a facilities map that would have all of my APR data in it. And if you'll notice, there's actually our new route right there. And we could actually search for that valve that we created. So we could type in Hulldale 200, and then it would actually zoom us to that location. I'm going to zoom out a few clicks since we're a bit close, but you can actually see the valve and its location on that route. So everything is connected to that single source of truth that's managed by APR. So hopefully that kind of showed you some of the functionality that's available within APR. And with that, I will hand it back to Jeff to talk about some of the components.
Excellent. Thank you, Vanessa. So what we showed you today was a number of different applications working together in the ArcGIS platform. So we showed you Pro, doing the editing for the routes and the calibration of the center lines. We also showed you ArcMap and ArcCatalog that were doing the initial setup of the linear referencing system, the configuration. So both of those tools were configured to point directly to the enterprise geodatabase. But then as we moved into the portal or the event editor application, we're actually using ArcGIS Server with the event editor registered with the portal. So it's a web server, it's the portal application, and then it's the enterprise server federated together with our portal. So those are really the APR really does cover a lot of the stack from Esri and a lot of moving components. So we have professional services that can also help with setting up this environment, as well as a number of business partners that have been doing APR implementations for a number of our customers. But this is basically the deployment pattern for APR within your existing Esri framework. And then finally, what I wanted to kind of bring to your attention is everything that we showed you today was actually configured, not customized. So the APR allows you a lot of flexibility to go into our catalog, to go into the web map and configure your facility viewer and configure those event layers exactly how you need them for your organization. If you have additional requirements for additional events or additional attributes on those events, it's easily done through the catalog window in the Enterprise Geodatabase, and then the APR tool will pick up those changes and reflect them in the editing interface as well. Same with the publishing and the consuming of that data through the portal. All that's done through a configure first, customize second methodology as we move forward with the platform. And with that, that concludes the demo portion and the slides portion of our presentation. And I'm going to hand it back to Tom to field some questions. Tom?
Yeah. Hey, Jeff, thanks a lot. We did get a handful of questions, so let's start walking through those. Anjali, if you wouldn't mind taking the lead on answering these, we'd appreciate it. The first couple have to do with licensing. For ArcGIS Data Reviewer and Workflow Manager features, do these extensions require licensing for those tools separately, or is that license included in APR?
ArcGIS Data Reviewer and Workflow Manager is included along with ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing license.
So one fee covers all of those?
Yes.
Okay. Then a separate question came in, is the APR toolset available on all license levels of ArcGIS Desktop?
ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing extension will need either standard or advanced licenses.
Okay, standard or advanced. Okay, the next question refers back to our current documentation. In there, there's a statement, arcgis.desktop.locationreferencing.dll does not have a public API and is currently for Esri internal use only. Is there a plan for this to change, and if so, when?
So at this current release, we do not have API for the desktop level. However, we provide API at the server level. Web developers can leverage the linear referencing web services to augment existing applications or build new ones that incorporate linear referencing functionality and data. This is available at ArcGIS Pipeline Referencing for server. We do not support, as of this current release, the API at the desktop level.
Okay. The next question is, can we import events in from, say, an Excel table with measured distances?
The answer is yes. We have geoprocessing tools called append events. Provided the user has route ID information and measures, they can use append event geoprocessing tool to load bulk event data.
Okay. Then next are measures between calibration points interpolated on the basis of 2D length or 3D lengths, assuming, of course, the center line says Z's.
At the current release, we support the calibration points interpolated on the basis of 2D length only. In the future release, in the future releases, we are considering the support of 3D. However, at this release, the calibration points are interpolated purely on the basis of 2D length.
Okay. Then there was a question related to Vanessa's, towards the end of Vanessa's demonstration. And the question is, why would you not recalc measures for the downstream center line on the realignment you just did? We may need to revisit that if you're not recalling at what point in the demonstration that was done, or Vanessa, if you do perhaps.
Yeah, so Tom, I can grab that one.
Okay.
So in that process, basically at the end of that reroute, when we didn't push the changes downstream, we basically create an equation. So a lot of pipeline operators still use equations quite frequently inside of the pipeline data model. So we have the ability to either create that equation, which would hold the original measure values on the downstream segment, or some operators like to push those changes out for the rest of that route. So you have that checkbox option. You can either create the equation, which would maintain the original stationing of the downstream segment, or push that change in length through the rest of the route.
Okay. And Jeff, let's stay with you for this next one, because I know it's something you've thought about a lot. But the question is, please comment on inline inspection, bulk load to UPDM and related tools and workflow. Is this functionality included in APR or in Portal Event Editor, or is working with a Esri business partner required for ILI bulk load functionality?
So a couple things. We have another demo where we show bulk loading ILI data into APR, and what we did for that demo is we actually created a third network called odometer readings, and we calibrated that route to reflect the odometer readings themselves. And then what we did was we directly loaded from the Excel spreadsheet into that feature, into that ILI feature class, using the odometer reading as our measure down the pipeline. And then from there, we could convert from that odometer to engineering stationing by just using the APR tools. That's just one configuration method. An additional configuration method would be to potentially utilize some type of process to stretch and align that data, calculate an engineering station, and then bulk load those engineering stations into the station series network. So APR doesn't really prescribe a method, but it gives you a number of different options of how to deal with ILI data. Most of the business partners from Esri who have tools that deal with ILI data are also investigating methods of how to incorporate APR into their tool sets. So I would encourage anyone that has any interest in this to reach out to myself directly or Vanessa directly, or to contact the business partner they're currently working with ILI data to discuss support for APR going forward.
Thanks, Jeff. Anjali, back to you. The next question is, what if you have temporal information for the same point event, for example? Can you see it all at the same time?
Using ArcGIS Pro, you can see all the data if you remove the time awareness. That's the property. When you right-click on the layer, go to the properties, you can remove the time filter in there, and you should be able to see the data at all the time.
Okay. And then the next question is, can we do image geoprocessing in APR?
I will have to I will have to get more details on that question. Hopefully we could
Okay.
answer that in detail.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
there are
fine.
a number of image processing tools, georeferencing tools that have been published in the latest version of Pro 1.4 for sure.
Okay, so on that question and a few others which appear to probably require more discussion and time than is available, we'll get back to those of you who asked those questions. I think there's another 3 or 4 questions which are reasonably specific or complicated in that regard. So as we mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar will be posted in the next few days, and you'll receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording. And just a reminder, APR is being featured at the Esri Petroleum GIS Conference in Houston, April 12 and 13. If you haven't already registered to attend, we encourage you to do so. We have a very strong day-long pipeline track packed with good presentations from customers and other experts. And the list of registrants is already very, very strong. So if you can join us, encourage you to do that. A number of us will be there and would be delighted to pick up conversations around APR and anything else we can do to help you implement the ArcGIS platform fully in your company. So thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and all of us hope you have a great day. Thank you.